Okay, we're going to try this again, and no, I don't have the banner back up because I got another idea to do something else, but being that it's been freezing fucking cold, I finally got the computer back, thanks to this nice guy who seems to work out of his house up in Berea here. I'm back online and going to move forward with some stuff, but unfortunately I just read something on Facebook that writer David Scow had been actually passed away on New Year's Day, but it was a drunk driver accident, ran into him or some shit, which sort of drives home what I said the last episode about no one is promised tomorrow. I know I had met him at Schiller a couple times, and he was a cool guy and a great writer, and it's just a fucking sin that this thing happened. But anyway, someone asked me about Andy Milligan, and to truly talk about Andy Milligan, I would have to give you my take on what got me over on 42nd Street, New York City in the first place. And of course, that was the fact that I graduated high school with a fucking D-. And I was classified 1A, which meant you don't have to deal with this now, and hopefully you'll never have to deal with it, but we didn't have the choice of a volunteer army back then. You got called up, you went. And, you know, you grew up on all these movies where basically everything's gung-ho and, you know, people get shot and they grab their chest and fall down and it's, you know, relatively painless affair. And then we come into the Vietnam War and news at 6 o'clock at night, where it was probably worse than a fucking Fulci film at its worst as far as gore and violence. And that's the reason this shit's not broadcast anymore, because they don't want you to see how fucked up things are. But after seeing that, that sort of drove home the fact that if I was called up, I wasn't going to go home. So I went over there and immersed myself into that whole thing. And going back to the Andy Milligan thing, if there was one director who epitomized what went on 42nd Street and beyond, it was Andy Milligan. He was basically that era. And I'm not going to say his films were great, because they weren't. But going back to what I'm talking about, you know, I'm over there on my off hours hanging out in dive bars, drinking, and hearing all kinds of interesting conversations of the who's hustling who's selling who's selling what, whatever. Now, you look at Milligan's Flesh Pot on 42nd Street, and that film is probably one of the most true-to-life depictions of 42nd Street ever filmed. I mean, you could take the deuce and stick it up your ass. I mean, you know, it's all bullshit and everything else is fabricated, but Milligan shot the shit because that's what he lived, the stuff. He lived that whole underground, you know, weird psychosexual stuff going on back then. The other film he did, Vapors, was only about, I don't know, a half hour long, and that was like before the Stonewall Revolution and all the other stuff. It was completely underground, and it was this, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe the first gay film that was shown above ground in film festivals and stuff. I'm not 100% sure. But I do know that it made an impact. It was filmed at the notorious St. Mark's Baths, which was shut down during the AIDS crisis and became the home of Kim's Underground Video, believe it or not. But, you know, it just showed, you know, what was going on then, you know, how the whole cruising pickup scene sort of worked, you know, the strange characters involved, and the whole thing about, I guess, you rent a room and you leave your door open and somebody would stand in the doorway and show you the goods, for lack of better words. So I know that according to what I read, I don't even know where I read it, someone had been pirating Vapors on VHS tape and selling it for like $100 a tape out of the Venus Theater box office or something, or whatever, one of those theaters. I think it was Chelly Wilson's right-hand man, Phil Tadero, who was a crook anyway. But anyway, you know, going back to that whole thing, Flesh Pot on 42nd Street, you know, was probably the best thing he ever did. And the problem with any of this stuff is that he did a whole other bunch of handfuls of films, Gutter Trash, The Filthy Five, a couple other ones, and I can't believe that these things are completely lost. Somebody's got to have a print of this in their collection somewhere. I can't believe that all the prints wound back to Michigan, and his idiot son melted them down for the Silver nitrate content. I just can't believe all this stuff is completely lost forever. There had to be other prints of this stuff. Andy had a problem with distributors. They all fucked him. I mean, he did a whole bunch of stuff for Michigan. That was one of the big distributors in New York. Then he ran over to, I don't know, was it, the initials of the company were JER. I think that he put the ghastly ones out from them, and they screwed him. And he went crawling back to the Michigans again. And then something with Shelley Wilson might have released Gutter Trash or something like that. And, he was known to run into places and, give me back my fucking movie. Then he had Brenston Pictures, of course, those guys, they were behind Deep Throat and Devil and Miss Jones and never fucking paid anybody anyhow. They also put out the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Human Factor. They also distributed his film Blood. And again, he never got paid. So, it was just this battle between him and the distributors. And, were his films any good? Well, like I said, Vapors, for the time and the audience, yeah. Fleshpot on 42nd Street, definitely. Could have done some better camera work. I mean, man, if he had only caught the upper things of those marquees when he was driving by or whatever he was doing, that would have been fucking classic. The horror films, the ghastly ones, was a Grindhouse, special, cheap effects, gore, blood, whatever. Then you had all his period pieces, like, Blood was a period piece. The Rats Are Coming, The Werewolves Are Here, and of course they added the rats because of the Willard success. That was another Michigan deal. Torture Dungeon, Man with Two Heads. I mean, they were all period pieces, but, they're laughable sometimes because you can see, like, electrical outlets on the walls, light switches and shit like that. But, for a Grindhouse type of crowd, yeah, we tore them apart. That's what we did. And like I said, Milligan lived that era. He was part of that, whole New York City sexual underground deal. And, I don't know any other director except for some of the porn guys that actually had lived that whole thing. But, he was a huge piece of that. And the other thing was, his films were not regulated to strictly New York City. No. We can get into another little aspect of this because... Well, I'll do a part two, but, to sort of wrap this up, he did what he could with what he had. And like I said, for my money, Fleshpot on 42nd Street, most true-to-life film about 42nd Street in Times Square ever shot. And like I said, my main focus getting over there when I did was because I honestly thought I was going to fucking go to Vietnam and die. I'm not a fucking soldier. I'm not a fighter. So, I would basically go over there and drink my ass off. And, like I said, you're sitting in these dive bars. And, after the pimp offered me, his girl, and I blew it off because I didn't have any money, he'd ignore me. But then there'd be other conversations. You just sit there and suck on your drink and absorb the ambiance, for lack of better words. And that's why, I know that conversations in Fleshpot on 42nd Street were real because I've heard shit just like them. So... This is going to be part one. Part two is going to be how Andy Milligan's films got out of New York City and a sort of, not a pissing contest, but a sort of comeback to something Joe Bob Briggs said about grindhouses in a certain film. So that'll be part two.